Hello guys, and welcome back to the channel. Now guys, there's no new news here, and the reason why the news is not new is because it is something that you have always suspected, probably always known. So with that guys, I bring you this. We have evidence DSS Army intimidated voters and INEC officials, and this is a report coming from the United States of America. So that's the headline. We have evidence DSS Army intimidated voters, INEC officials, and it's a piece credited to the United States. So now let's now see what is being said here. The United States government says there is evidence that Nigerian security agents, including the Department of State Services and the Army, intimidated voters, officials of the Independent National Electoral Commission, and even election observers during the 2019 general election. According to the US, this fueled the impression that the Nigerian army worked for the success of the ruling All Progressive Congress APC. The US further stated that the Nigerian judiciary was still susceptible to intimidation by the executive and the legislative arms of the government, adding that there was corruption in the judiciary which made it not able to function independently. These observations were contained in the 2019 country reports on human rights practices in Nigeria, released by the United States Department of State on Wednesday, a copy of which has been obtained. The 44-page report reads in part, during the year 2019, INEC conducted the presidential election, the National Assembly elections, the State House Assembly elections, and the local elections in all 36 states, plus the Federal Capital Territory, as well as the governorship elections in 30 states. There was evidence military and security services intimidated voters, electoral officials, and election observers. In addition, violence in several states contributed to lower voter participation and added to the sentiment that the army is a tool of the ruling party in many parts of the country, particularly in the South. For example, widespread violence and military involvement in electoral processes, including during the vote coalition process, significantly scarred the governorship election in Rivers State. Additionally, several of INEC's resident electoral commissioners reported DSS operatives intimidated them when the RECs attempted to protect voting materials. Some RECs reported security service personnel visited them multiple times prior to the elections. It added, there were reports that corruption, including vote buying, were historically high during the 2018-2019 electoral season. Examples of vote buying were apparent in the rerun of the Osun State gubernatorial election in September 2018 and during the Kano State gubernatorial election in March 9, 2019. According to the report, the judiciary has been unable to function optimally due to executive and legislative intimidation as well as corruption. It said court officials were also poorly paid, thereby making them susceptible to manipulation. The US stated, although the Constitution and law provides for an independent judiciary, the judicial branch remains susceptible to pressure from the executive and legislative branches. Political leaders influenced the judiciary, particularly at the state and local levels. Understaffing, underfunding, inefficiency, and corruption prevented the judiciary from functioning adequately. There are no continuing education requirements for attorney, and police officers were often assigned to serve as prosecutors. Judges frequently failed to appear for trials. In addition, the salaries of court officials were low, and they often lacked proper equipment and training. Speaking further on the judiciary, the US report noted there was a widespread public perception that judges were easily bribed and litigants could not rely on the court to render impartial judgments. The Constitution and law provides for an independent judiciary in civil matters, but the executive and legislative branches, as well as business interests, exerted influence and pressure in civil cases. Official corruption and lack of will to implement court decisions also interfered with due process. Meanwhile, the report also highlighted the high rate of human rights abuse perpetrated by security agents against journalists, rights groups, and the Islamic movement of Nigeria. It stated that the Buhari government had not taken action against any of the military officials that killed over 300 Shiites in 2015. The US explained that Governor Nasir El-Rufai of Kaduna State had set up a panel of inquiry on the matter, and the panel had also called for the proscription of the IMN, which was done. However, the aspect of the report that indicted the military officers had not been implemented. The report adds, as of September 2019, there were no reports of the federal government further investigation or holding individuals accountable for the 2015 killing and subsequent mass burial of members of a Shia political organization, the Islamic Movement of Nigeria, and other civilians by the Nigerian Army in Zaria, Kaduna State. A 2016 report by the government of Kaduna State included acceptance of the Commission's recommendation to investigate and prosecute allegations of excessive and disproportionate use of force by the Nigerian Army. As of September, there was no indication that authorities had held any members of the Nigerian Army accountable for the events in Zaria. On the state of the Nigerian prison, now Nigerian Correctional Service, the Nigerian prison of course has been rebranded as the Nigerian Correctional Service, the report pointed out that prison and detention center conditions remained harsh and life-threatening. Prisoners and detainees reportedly were subjected to gross overcrowding, inadequate medical care, food and water shortages, and other abuses, and some of these conditions resulted in death. Meanwhile, attempts to get a response from the APC were unsuccessful as of the time of going to print. Calls made to the party's National Publicity Secretary, Malam Lanre Issa Onilu, were neither answered nor returned. A response to a text sent to him on the subject is still being awaited as of the time of going to press. So now this is the report, of course, of the United States, and this, by the way, is something that is public notice, so you can just go to the US pages and just go and search it out there, and it will come up for you to read in full. So this is not even you taking anybody's word for anything. So the sum total of this is effectively what you've always known. Rigged is effectively what the Americans are saying about the Nigerian electoral system, especially the governorship, the presidential, and the senatorial, etc. In fact, the whole gamut of it really is summed up in one word, and that word is rigged. So effectively what the Americans are saying is that, look, there's nothing really like democracy going on there. All they do is rig themselves into power, because it can't be any clearer in the language and the tone and the undertone of this piece. They are saying they used DSS and the army to intimidate voters, and that the state apparatus, of course, were weighted in the direction of the ruling party, and the ruling party used to the fullest the state apparatus to perpetuate itself in power. This is effectively what this report is saying, and it's quite clear to me. But then, of course, I started off that there is no new news here, because there's nothing that's just been read out to you now that you did not know prior. You did not really need the American department, whichever department it was. Let me just scroll back up just to check which department it was. Which department was it again? Let me just get that for you. Yes, so you don't need the American Department of State Services to tell you that the elections in Nigeria in 2019, the presidential election especially, and Osun State, Kano State, etc., you don't need the Americans to come and tell you that it was rigged. It was rigged right in front of your eyes. You all saw the rigging going on, and you then saw them install their own man to sit in judgment on something that they had done. And the guy, of course, then told us that Buhari is eminently qualified, were his words, and his fait accompli. So this is what transpired. So that is why I said there's no new news here. So the Americans saying it now in their report is just an independent verification and assertion of something that is already known. So even outside of this report, we knew that that election was rigged, and the international community are now saying that election was also rigged. So now that is now known both in Nigeria and internationally that the election was indeed rigged. Now what? So now what are the Americans going to do? Is it just a report that will go on file because of course they don't want to interfere in the affairs of a sovereign nation? Or would they then, in this their constant thing of speaking of democracy, put pressure on the Nigerian system to say, no, this is not really the nature and the spirit of democracy. This is not a representation of the will of the people. When Buhari was voted out, but it was foisted upon the nation against his will, then that does not really represent democracy, because democracy simply boils down to one singularity: is the will of the people. So if the will of the people is not manifested, and what is manifesting is contrary to the will of the people, then there's no democracy taking place. Conversations in the comment section, the Americans have spoken. Now what says you? What is your reading? I'm not going to put words in your mouth, so you can tell me in your own understanding what your reading of the Nigerian electoral process is, especially the round of elections that we've just witnessed, which was quite alarming. So come share thoughts about all this with me in the comment section. But before you do that, click on the red subscribe button so it turns gray. Bell button notifies you every time I drop a new video. Then come tell me what you're making of what the Americans are making of our electoral processes in the comment section. So I'll leave you here. Carry this conversation on with you in the comment section. But here I say peace.